When Donald Trump raised his voice on live television, it was not the first time people had seen him rely on volume to emphasize a point. Over the years, he had built a reputation for speaking forcefully, often overwhelming opponents in debates and interviews by sheer presence and intensity. His supporters often viewed this as strength, a refusal to back down. But in this particular exchange with Jasmine Crockett, something unusual happened. His tone, his energy, his signature force was all there, yet it failed to land the way it usually did. Instead of sparking applause or intimidating his opponent, his raised voice was met with calm composure that shifted the entire balance of the moment. Jasmine Crockett didn't lean forward. She didn't talk over him. She didn't wave her hands or try to shout louder. She simply let him finish, and then she responded in a measured, almost steady tone that cut through the noise. It was this contrast that caught so many people off guard. People expected Trump's volume to dominate the room, as it often does, but here it was neutralized in an unexpected way. Crockett's composure highlighted something powerful. Sometimes it isn't about who can shout the loudest, but who can remain centered when emotions rise. The psychology of the moment is what made it resonate. Human instinct often pushes us to match energy with energy. If one person yells, the other tends to yell back. If one raises their tone, the natural reflex is to do the same. But when one person stays calm while the other grows louder, the dynamic changes. Trump's shouting, which in other settings had worked to put opponents on edge, now seemed almost out of place against Crockett's steady delivery. The more he tried to drive his point home with intensity, the more her calmness made his volume seem unnecessary. Observers noticed this immediately. Social media commentary after the clip spread revealed that viewers weren't just impressed by what Crockett said, but by how she carried herself while saying it. The idea that composure can disarm even the most aggressive style became the real takeaway. Trump's forceful presence, usually a hallmark of his communication style, was turned into background noise because Crockett refused to play the same game. There's also a cultural layer to why this moment hit so strongly. Trump has always leaned into the idea of being unapologetically bold, someone who refuses to soften his words or lower his voice. It has been part of his brand from the very beginning, but in this situation, it met its limit. Composure proved stronger than volume. By keeping her tone level and her body language firm, Crockett managed to flip the script. People weren't talking about what he said as much as they were talking about how she responded. The clip also demonstrates something about perception. In politics, perception often matters as much as substance. Trump's raised voice may have been meant to show confidence, authority, and control. Yet, next to Crockett's composure, it looked different, less like authority and more like frustration. That subtle shift is what made the clip go viral. People saw someone known for dominating conversations suddenly confronted with a style he couldn't overpower. The deeper lesson here is that composure, especially in high-pressure environments, doesn't just keep the individual calm, it actively reframes the entire situation. By refusing to be rattled, Crockett didn't just protect her own image, she reshaped how the entire exchange was perceived. Instead of being remembered for what was shouted, it became memorable for how calmly it was diffused. For Trump, who has built his persona on being bigger, louder, and more forceful than his opponents, it showed that not everyone can be overwhelmed by volume. And for Crockett, it showed that the quiet power of composure can sometimes win a battle before the other side even realizes they've lost it. The reason the exchange between Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett spread so quickly online was not just because of what was said, but because of the contrast in their styles. Trump came in with a sharp, forceful approach, his voice raised, his tone commanding. He has always relied on that energy to make his presence impossible to ignore. Whether in debates, rallies, or interviews, his method has often been to dominate the stage by being the loudest voice in the room. Against many opponents, this works because it unsettles them, pulling them into his rhythm and forcing them to react on his terms. But Jasmine Crockett didn't step into that trap. Instead of matching his tone, she created a direct opposite. She spoke slowly, clearly, and with no signs of irritation. Her calmness wasn't just a personality trait in that moment, it became a strategy. That contrast is what made the clip so powerful. On its own, Trump's raised voice would not have been unusual. People have seen him do that countless times before. What was unusual was the way his energy was absorbed and then neutralized by someone who didn't move an inch emotionally. Viewers who tuned in weren't just listening to words. They were watching body language, tone, and delivery. The striking difference between Trump's fiery demeanor and Crockett's ice-cold response made the clip replayable. In fact, many who shared it online pointed out that the real impact wasn't in the insult or the comeback, it was in how opposite the two seemed in that exact second. That contrast became the reason people kept watching and rewatching. Trump has built much of his identity in the political arena on creating moments that dominate headlines. A strong phrase, a raised voice, a dramatic reaction, these are the kinds of things that turn into news bites. Yet this time, it wasn't his words that went viral, but Crockett's ability to respond without raising her voice. The more people watched, the more they noticed how sharp the contrast was. He represented intensity, she represented control. He pushed with force, she stood still with composure. Together, the two sides of that clash created a viral moment that no scripted performance could have matched. Another reason the contrast resonated is that it spoke to a larger theme people have been feeling for years. The idea that noise isn't always power. In politics, especially in televised settings, there's often a belief that whoever talks the loudest is the one who gets remembered. Trump has leaned into that idea effectively, often grabbing headlines through his ability to fill space with his voice, but Crockett showed that a quieter approach can also capture attention, and sometimes even more powerfully, because it highlights the difference between emotion and control. For many viewers around the world. The clip felt symbolic. On one side was Trump, embodying the aggressive high-volume style that has defined much of his public career. On the other was Crockett, representing a different kind of authority, one rooted in patience, restraint, and clarity. That stark difference was more than just entertaining. It was eye-opening for audiences who saw how dramatically two people could handle the same moment in opposite ways. The virality of the clip was proof that audiences respond to contrast. If both Trump and Crockett had been shouting, the moment might have been heated, but it wouldn't have been memorable. If both had stayed calm, it might have come across as ordinary. What made it unforgettable was the tension between the two styles. Trump's shouting looked even louder when paired against Crockett's silence, and her calm looked even sharper when framed against his raised voice. Each magnified the other, creating the kind of dynamic that keeps people talking long after the cameras stop rolling. This is also why the clip spread far beyond political circles. It wasn't just about policy or debate. It became about human behavior under pressure. People everywhere could recognize the dynamic. One person yelling, another person staying calm, and the unexpected outcome where the quiet voice held more weight than the loud one. That dynamic is relatable, which made the moment transcend politics and enter the realm of everyday conversation. Trump may not have intended to create a viral contrast, but in the end, his volume set the stage for Crockett's composure to shine brighter. Without his shouting, her calm response might not have stood out. Without her restraint, his raised voice might have been just another outburst. Together, the two styles created a moment that captured global attention, proving that sometimes, the most memorable exchanges are not about agreement or disagreement, but about the clash of presentation itself. When Donald Trump raised his voice during that live television exchange, he was leaning on one of his most familiar tools, volume as persuasion. For years, he has been known for speaking in a way that fills the room, cutting off opponents, and driving home points with intensity that leaves little space for interruption. His supporters often view this approach as evidence of passion and strength, believing that the force in his delivery shows conviction. Yet, in the face of JasmineCrockett's steady response, that strategy seemed to falter. The moment highlighted something many viewers had been reminded of before, but saw in a new way. Volume doesn't equal truth, and it doesn't guarantee persuasion. Crockett's response was notable not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it. She didn't shout over him. She didn't try to raise her tone in order to match his. Instead, she made the choice to focus on the substance of her words, the sharpness of her reply, that truth is not determined by who yells the lie, delivered with clarity and composure. This showed audiences around the world that arguments are not won by force alone. The power of a statement lies in its reasoning and precision, not the decibels behind it. Trump's habit of using volume as a rhetorical tool has been central to his political identity. In rallies and debates, he often emphasizes his points by speaking louder, faster, and more aggressively than those around him. For many, this has created an aura of dominance. It gives the impression of a leader who is confident and unwilling to be silenced. But in this particular clash, his loudness didn't translate into strength. Instead, it came across as frustration, especially when contrasted with Crockett's even tone. The fact that people shared her response online more than his outburst made it clear. Audiences were more impressed by substance than by sound. The way Crockett handled the exchange is a reminder of a deeper truth in communication. People remember words that make them think, not just words that make them feel the pressure of intensity. Trump's raised voice might have demanded attention in the moment, but Crockett's line carried the message that endured after the cameras turned off. She exposed a vulnerability in his style, showing that when someone refuses to be pulled into a shouting match, his approach loses its edge. This isn't to say Trump's strategy of speaking with intensity hasn't been effective. In many situations, it has propelled him through debates where opponents stumbled, intimidated by the pace and volume of his delivery. It has energized crowds at rallies, where shouting became part of the spectacle. But this viral moment showed the other side of the equation, that loudness can lose its force when paired against calm reasoning. Crockett didn't just counter his words. She redefined the meaning of the exchange by demonstrating that shouting doesn't carry the weight of truth. What resonated with so many viewers was that her response tapped into a universal experience. Almost everyone has been in a situation where someone raises their voice to assert authority or dominance, and many know the instinct to respond in kind, to match loudness with loudness. But Crockett's restraint highlighted a different path, to let the other person's shouting expose itself while calmly presenting a stronger point. Trump's insistence on being heard at a higher volume only made her words land harder when she spoke with measured clarity. *The viral spread of the clip also revealed how audiences interpret conflict in modern media. Loud exchanges may draw immediate attention, but it's the moments of unexpected composure that stay memorable. Viewers didn't just hear Crockett's words, they felt the shift in power dynamics when she refused to let volume dictate the outcome. Trump's approach, once seen as unshakable, looked less effective when the other side simply refused to meet him on those terms. The fact that people shared her words as quotes, rather than his, underscores how reasoning outlasts noise. In the end, the lesson embedded in that moment is that message matters more than volume. Trump's raised voice was an attempt to control the room, but Crockett's calm dismantled that effort by anchoring the exchange in logic. The contrast became a global talking point, not because shouting is unusual for him, but because this time, the shouting didn't win. Instead, it was a reminder that when truth is paired with composure, it has the power to overshadow even the loudest voice. The exchange between Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett did not just stay in the United States. It reached audiences far beyond, and that global reach was largely because of how people everywhere recognized the power of restraint over force. The clip was shared on international news outlets, replayed on social media platforms across multiple countries, and sparked discussions not only about American politics, but also about human behavior under pressure. What struck so many viewers worldwide was not simply that Trump shouted he has done that countless times in different settings, but that Crockett's cold, controlled response shifted the entire energy of the moment. Her calmness became the headline, while his anger became the background. For Trump, who has built much of his political persona on commanding presence and dominating the spotlight. This was a rare moment where his style backfired. His raised voice, which so often energized his supporters and gave him control of a conversation, was neutralized by someone who refused to be shaken. Crockett's words and delivery translated across borders because they spoke to something deeper than politics. The idea that composure can dismantle aggression. People in other countries, even those less familiar with Trump's usual style, immediately understood the dynamic. The image of one person shouting, while the other stayed calm, needed no explanation. It was universally relatable. The virality of the clip showed how quickly a single televised exchange can ripple through global audiences. In Europe, commentators used it as an example of how political debates can be won without theatrics. In parts of Asia, social media users praised Crockett's ability to remain steady in the face of pressure, drawing parallels to cultural values of restraint and self-control. In Africa and South America, users highlighted the universality of the lesson, noting that in every society, people have seen how loud voices try to dominate, but calm reasoning often earns more respect. Trump's presence in the clip made it even more impactful, since he is a figure already known around the world, and seeing him confronted with composure added to the intrigue. The fact that the moment spread so widely also speaks to how audiences are increasingly drawn to authenticity. Trump's volume was familiar, it was what people expected from him, but Crockett's steady tone was unexpected, especially in that high-pressure setting. The unexpected often goes viral, and in this case, it was her refusal to react in kind that turned the exchange into an international talking point around the world. The clip was framed not just as a political debate, but as a symbolic encounter between noise and control, force and restraint. There was also a sense of irony in how people interpreted the exchange. Trump has long been one of the most recognizable voices in global politics, a man who rarely lowers his tone and rarely allows others to have the last word. Yet here, it was not his booming voice that carried the diet, was the measured reply of someone who didn't flinch. That reversal fascinated viewers. The man who often sets the tempo of conversations was suddenly seen as being out, not by volume, but by silence paired with sharp words. In many ways. The global resonance of this clip reflected a broader frustration with the idea that shouting equals strength. People from different cultures saw Crockett's calmness as a refreshing counteract. Her response demonstrated that leadership, confidence, and authority don't require raising one's voice. This message landed in places where political discourse often mirrors the same kind of shouting matches that Trump embodies. By staying collected, Crockett not only handled the moment for herself, but also created a template that resonated universally. For Trump, this moment may not have shifted his loyal supporters, but it did highlight the limits of his approach when seen on an international stage. Outside of the U.S., audiences often analyze American politics through moments like these, and this particular clip became symbolic of how different styles of communication can alter perceptions instantly. The man known for his intensity was placed side by side with a woman who relied on calm reasoning, and viewers around the world drew their own conclusions about which style carried more weight. What made the moment go viral on a global scale was not just politics, but the universal theme it represented. Shouting and composure are contrasts everyone understands, no matter the culture. Trump embodied the former, Crockett embodied the latter, and the outcome struck a chord worldwide. In a time when people are inundated with noise, the quiet clarity of her response traveled further and lasted longer than the raised voice that had tried to dominate the room. As the dust settled after that televised exchange, what remained was not the echo of Donald Trump's raised voice, but the steady impression left by Jasmine Crockett's composure. Viewers around the world had witnessed a clash of styles that felt larger than politics, one rooted in force, the other in restraint. Trump's booming tone, so often the centerpiece of his public appearances, suddenly seemed less commanding when set against Crockett's cold, precise response. The irony of the moment was that the louder voice didn't become the lasting voice. Instead, the calm reply carried forward, repeated and shared millions of times across social platforms and news outlets. The viral spread of the clip wasn't just about entertainment value. It revealed something profound about how audiences respond to conflict. In an age when shouting matches dominate television and politics alike, people are tired of noise for noise's sake. Crockett's refusal to match Trump's energy offered a refreshing alternative, proof that real authority isn't about volume, but about control. It showed that a message grounded in clarity can travel further than one delivered at the top of the lungs. That lesson resonated beyond politics, touching anyone who has ever faced someone louder, stronger, or seemingly more dominant and wondered whether they could stand their ground. For Trump, the moment served as both a reminder and a challenge. His ability to command attention through forceful delivery has always been one of his strongest tools. It electrifies rallies, dominates debates, and keeps him at the center of conversation. But this encounter revealed that even his greatest strength can lose its edge when someone refuses to play by the same rules. Crockett didn't need to outshout him. She only needed to expose the limits of volume as persuasion. That shift was subtle, but it was enough to turn the balance of power in her favor, if only for a few moments. What made the exchange truly memorable was the universality of its message. People everywhere understood it without needing deep political context. It wasn't just a story about an American congresswoman and a former president. It was a story about human interaction, about how composure can disarm aggression, and how calmness can carry more weight than anger. That relatability turned a single television moment into a global conversation. In the end, the exchange between Trump and Crockett will likely be remembered less for the specifics of policy and more for what it represented. It was a rare glimpse into how two very different approaches to communication collided, and how, in that collision, the quieter style triumphed in the eyes of many. Crockett reminded viewers that strength is not always about who can shout the loudest. Sometimes, strength is about standing still, speaking clearly, and letting the words do the work. That's why the clip became more than just a political moment. It became a lesson in power, in poise, and in the enduring truth that volume fades,